Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, which will cover findings from the August 2024 version of our Emerging Technology Survey, or ETS for short. This is the second ETS survey period for this calendar year, and the full findings report and replay of this webinar will be available to clients on the ETR research platform by the end of the day. The ETS is designed to provide data-driven insight into which private technology companies are gaining traction in global enterprises by tracking evaluation, utilization, and churn metrics for more than 400 private companies and open source technologies. In this report, we will detail the key findings by metric, vendor, and some top performing sectors. If you would like to see the full ETS data set, you can access the visualization platform at app.etr.ai. And you will also find over 300 individual vendor data reports that ETR publishes in accompaniment with the ETS. If you don't have access to our research platform, fret not. You can start a free trial by visiting our public website, www.etr.ai, or simply by emailing us at service@etr.ai. Okay, let's get started. Polling for this ETS survey was conducted from June 23rd until July 15th and captured participation from roughly 1,350 IT decision makers, including 212 from Fortune 500 companies and 306 from Global 2000 organizations. Of all respondents, 25% hold C-suite titles, with another 50% of respondents at the VP or director level. Finally, 59% are from large organizations, and 41% are from mid-sized and small organizations. ETS currently tracks over 450 emerging technology vendors and frameworks. Survey respondents are prompted with the following answer options to gauge awareness, evaluation, utilization, and churn metrics. First, we have our two evaluation metrics, which are plan to evaluate and currently evaluating. Second, we have our two utilization metrics, which are evaluated, plan to utilize, and allocating further. Next, we have our awareness metric, which is being aware of the vendor, but with no plans to evaluate. And lastly, we have our two churn metrics, which are evaluated, no plan to utilize, and replaced or put in containment. Throughout the webinar, the ETR team will be discussing a proprietary net sentiment metric that helps aggregate the aforementioned metrics into a single number. In its simplest form, we are aggregating the positive metrics and then subtracting that with the negative metrics. In addition, our proprietary mindshare metric represents overall enterprise pervasion and awareness within our sample. That metric is calculated by aggregating the evaluation, utilization, and the evaluated no plan to utilize citations, and then dividing that sum by the unique sector respondents. We will get into more sector-specific data shortly, but let's begin with a broader look across our survey universe for outperformers by the various sentiment metrics I just described. This slide shows mindshare on the x-axis and net sentiment on the y-axis, and focuses on those vendors and technologies with higher overall mindshare. And then we'll take a look at the smaller mindshare vendors in the following slide. Here we see that OpenAI remains the net sentiment leader and comes in second place in overall mindshare. Other leaders in the ML/AI space, such as Hugging Face, TensorFlow, Databricks, Anaconda, and Jasper, remain strongly positioned. Kubernetes container orchestration technology continues to stand out by leading with the highest mindshare and being second in overall net sentiment. Another container player, Docker, is very well positioned with the fourth highest mindshare and fourth highest net sentiment among this grouping. And although this is largely the ML/AI and container orchestration show, as always, security vendors are well represented in this analysis, with names you will be hearing a lot of in this report, including OneTrust, Snyk, BeyondTrust, and Wiz. Now, before we move on, we want to point out that OpenAI holds the highest net sentiment and second highest mind share in its sixth consecutive ETS iteration. There will be much more on OpenAI later on this webinar when we detail the ML/AI sector. And now moving on to the smaller mind share end of the spectrum, another open source technology lost its top spot in the prior survey period and continues to fall, with Istio now being overtaken by Sonar Source. We also see a strong grouping from ML/AI vendors with Cohere, Copy.ai, and Scale AI showing up strong in this survey period, illustrating that the Gen AI market is much more than a one or two vendor party. Without calling out any specific companies, you can see here highlighted in red the sheer number of familiar names that have single-digit or negative net sentiment scores in this survey period is worth highlighting. In the next two slides, we look at which vendors saw the largest net sentiment improvements and declines since our last ETS survey in February. There are a lot of new names on this list versus last year, but none stand out as much as the significant improvements seen by Outreach.io, Open, Talkdesk, and Cognizant, all of which captured the largest improvements in their consecutive net sentiment scores. It should be noted that Cognizant rebounded from negative levels, so kudos to them for a strong reversal in their ranking among our IT decision maker community. While these large improvements should be applauded, the ability to grow off an already high base is even more impressive, and that is exactly what Anthropic was able to do in this survey's data set. Now for the most significant survey over survey net sentiment declines. The biggest decline came from Resonate, Vimo, and Tricentis. However, it was Istio and Benchmark ESG who saw their previously elevated net sentiment score weaken in this survey period. In the next two slides, we apply the same analysis, but with a different metric, and examine which vendors saw the largest mindshare improvements and declines since the February survey. Here we see that the ML/AI frenzy continues, with Anthropic seeing the largest growth in mindshare, nearly doubling since the last period. Additionally, OpenAI somehow grew its mindshare from an already extremely elevated level. Other names with impressive growth in mindshare include Splashtop, Chronicled, and Kadena. In security, Wiz shows up again, along with Security Scorecard and network security player Cato as well. And now the more dubious award of largest mindshare contraction goes to SkyTap, Netlify, and Greenbird. It is interesting to note that very well-established names like Stripe and Postgres both captured survey over survey declines as well, although both vendors still retain very high overall mindshare positioning among our survey sample.
Now let's take a look at the very critical evaluation component. In this analysis, we plot the mindshare of the respective sector on the x-axis and the evaluation rate on the y-axis. Those vendors highlighted in green hold evaluation rates in the top 10th percentile of the survey. Once again, OpenAI remains dominant. Following its smashing introduction in the February 2023 survey, OpenAI's evaluation rates have begun to temper since August of 2023, while remaining incredibly healthy. No need to worry. OpenAI's consistent and sizable gains in the percentage of respondents indicating plans to allocate further resources to the vendor tell the real story. Our ITDM community is progressing along the path from awareness to evaluation to production, with allocating further plans jumping from 19 to 23% and now up to 30% over the past 3 survey periods. As for the other positives, another machine learning and AI player, Anthropic, registers the second highest evaluation rate. The next highest evaluation rate belonged to RapidSOS, followed by 2 other generative AI vendors, Hugging Face and Jasper. Larger mindshare vendors here include Greenbird and Word Sensing, followed by mature vendors Automation Anywhere and OneTrust. In the next slide, we will zoom in on the crowded outlined area to call out some additional companies. As usual, many of these additional names happen to be information security vendors. Joining Safeguard Cyber, Sneak, and OneTrust on the previous slide, Salt Security, Abnormal Security, Wiz, Threat Quotient, Security Scorecard, Sysdig, and HackerOne all registered solid evaluation rates this survey period. Many of these vendors have become fixtures in this analysis, including Sneak, who made its 7th consecutive appearance this survey. Meanwhile, H2O.ai and Scale AI also stood out in this analysis. Moving on to evaluation improvements, fintech vendor Mambu saw the greatest improvement in evaluation rates since February, followed by GRC vendor Hyperproof and Conversica in CRM. Several other CRM vendors also registered solid year-over-year improvements, including Cognism, Outreach.io, and CRM Next. Over the next couple slides, we'll take a similar approach to key utilization rates, which includes those survey respondents who have evaluated and plan to utilize a vendor, or those who are already allocating further resources to a vendor. Open source vendors and technologies continue to dominate the top levels of this analysis, led by Kubernetes and Docker. After that, Figma and Postman hold the next highest utilization rates. Meanwhile, OneTrust, BeyondTrust, and 1Password stand out as utilization outperformers among information security vendors. Taking a look at utilization improvements, we see that SonarSource, VTEX, Contentful, and OpenAI lead the analysis, registering the largest respective increases in utilization rates since February. Impressively, OpenAI, Databricks, SonarSource, Neo4j, BrowserStack, and Calendly all make an appearance in this analysis off of already high bases. On a more pessimistic note, the next two slides depict those vendors with the highest and worsening churn rates. Churn measures those respondents who have evaluated and have no plans to utilize a vendor, or those who have decided to replace a vendor. This survey, Zoho saw the largest churn rate across the survey universe by a material margin. They are followed by Dashlane and Calendly. It is not the first time that Zoho and Calendly have made an appearance in this analysis. Of other large mindshare vendors, Dialpad, Postgres, Automation Anywhere, Cohesity, and Splashtop saw the highest churn rates, again with many repeat offenders. As far as churn rate increases go, Vimo, Topology, and Chronicled have jumped the most over the past 6 months. Dashlane and Splashtop also saw their churn rates worsen, off of already high levels. Finally, I'll touch upon a more positive analysis, which is the highest conversion rates. This takes the two utilization metrics and divides that by our two churn metrics, or more simply put, it measures those who are using versus those who have decided not to use the vendor post-evaluation. OpenAI, Kubernetes, and Figma register the highest conversion rates while keeping churn rates under 10%. Though utilization rates are smaller, SonarSource, Hugging Face, and Anthropic have had conversion success with minimal relative churn. All right, this concludes our higher level overview of the ETS data. Now I'll pass the mic over to my colleagues for some additional sector and vendor specific takeaways.
In the ML and AI sector, it's perhaps no surprise that two generative AI companies are dominating in net sentiment. OpenAI, makers of ChatGPT, stands out by a mile in both net sentiment and mindshare, while Anthropic is a distant second in net sentiment, but sits at 4th ranked in mindshare. Anthropic has grown considerably in net sentiment, jumping from 5th highest in this sector 6 months ago to now 2nd highest, and it went from 7th highest in mindshare 6 months ago to 4th highest today. Databricks holds the 2nd highest mindshare and 3rd highest net sentiment here, and TensorFlow is 3rd highest in mindshare. Labelbox, Outer Bounds, Weights and Biases, and Reggie.ai had the weakest net sentiment in this sector. A closer look at the data shows OpenAI is also a standout leader in the sector, among vendors with at least 50 citations, for those who plan to allocate further spend on the vendor, with 30% indicating this spending plan. Also, 12% of respondents said they plan to utilize OpenAI after evaluating the vendor, which is notable. OpenAI's 71% net sentiment represents an 8 percentage point climb since last year. Anthropic is also doing well. It has seen the largest positive change in net sentiment. Its 47% net sentiment is a whopping 23 percentage points higher than it was last year, which is certainly remarkable. And finally, in the ML and AI sector, we have utilization to churn ratio. It's an important analysis that examines how many respondents are planning to utilize or increase spend on a vendor versus plans to replace that vendor or those who have decided not to use a vendor after an evaluation period. It's essentially a vendor's ability to retain customers after evaluation. And the top vendors here are OpenAI, Anthropic, Databricks, Hugging Face, and TensorFlow. It's worth noting, too, that our ETR Observatory report on ML and AI from last April located all of these vendors in the leading or advancing vectors, alongside the ML and AI offerings from Meta and the 3 major public cloud platforms, which indicates the spending momentum on these emerging technology players is on par with established publicly traded names in the field. You can access the ETR Observatory report on our website if you want to take a closer look at that data. Also, in this particular chart, we see Anthropic, Scale AI, DataRobot, and Copy.ai had the most improvement in their utilization to churn ratios since last survey.
And now moving on to the information security portion of the show. As ETR subscribers and community members know, security has remained the top priority for ETR survey respondents since September of 2020. This prioritization trend has driven mindshare among security vendors in the ETS to peak levels in 2024. The full ETS security data is available on the ETR platform and is based on nearly 1,000 IT decision makers that cited a response in the information security sector. The ETS covers almost 100 private information security vendors, so the best way to dig into the data details is on our platform. Given the overwhelming breadth of coverage, this part of the report examines sector-wide data and shows similar names dominating the landscape. OneTrust leads all vendors in net sentiment, followed by Wiz, Sneak, and Armis. 1Password, BeyondTrust, Arctic Wolf, and OneTrust also lead in mindshare for the second consecutive survey period. One of the many interesting aspects of this data set is the continued strength of Protect AI, which captured the 6th highest net sentiment score across the entire sector, despite having a mindshare percentage of under 10%. Cribble, who just announced a capital raise, also has leapt into one of the top net sentiment spots. On the other end of the spectrum, the much publicized troubles at Lacework have seemed to impact the ITDM community, as net sentiment for this vendor has reached negative levels in this survey period. Here, we switch to the ETS custom filtering dashboard. Although not shown on this slide, last year, across the entire ETS survey universe, 8 of the 20 vendors with the highest levels of plan to evaluate indications were in the information security sector. In this survey period, the information security sector lost most of those spots, with only OneTrust remaining. In this slide, we see the highest ranking of our allocating further metric across the entire information security sector, which essentially means that these vendors have moved beyond the evaluation phase and are actively in production. OneTrust, 1Password, and BeyondTrust are the leaders in this important ranking. Tanium, Security Scorecard, Wiz, and Netscope are also strongly positioned, above the double-digit threshold. OneTrust, Sneak, and Wiz are also the top 3 net sentiment scores at 35%, 28%, and 28%, respectively. Also, Sneak, BioCatch, and Cribble are the vendors that are most frequently being currently evaluated in this ETS survey period. And lastly, Wiz, Nord Security, and Cribble again garnered the highest year-over-year growth in mindshare. Showing off one of the many proprietary features of our data platform, check out this proprietary analysis where ETR tracks utilization versus churn ratios for today's top private tech companies. Basically, this ratio should be interpreted as a vendor's ability to retain customers after the POC phase. And the best performers in this analysis are OneTrust, Wiz, BeyondTrust, Savient, and BitSight, with honorable mentions to Netscope and 1Password for consistently high results in the top 10 ranking. If you would like to dive deeper into any of these individual vendor datasets, please check out our ETS data reports, of which we publish more than 300 of every single survey period. And that's a wrap on the security sector.
Turning to the infrastructure software sector, we see Postman, Apache Kafka, Sonar Source, and Jenkins have the highest net sentiment. Postman, Apache Kafka, and Jenkins also have the highest mind share in the sector by a wide margin. Sonar Source saw a notable growth in its net sentiment and its mind share over the past 6 months too. At the back of the pack, Vispero's TPGI, Kintone, Algolia, and CF Engine have the lowest net sentiment in the sector and also some of the lowest mind share as well. When sorting vendors in this sector with at least 50 citations through ETR's custom filtering capability, Jenkins, Postman, Apache Kafka, Sonar Source, and Calibra are the top 5 when it comes to allocating further indications. Sonar Source had the largest positive change in net sentiment from a year ago, jumping 18 percentage points to reach the 39% net sentiment level this survey. CloudBees, Supabase, and Level Access all came in second in positive net sentiment change over last year, with each growing 11 percentage points. Apache Kafka has the highest mind share in the sector, but LucidWorks shows the highest growth in mind share from last year, growing 8 percentage points. And in a utilization to churn analysis of the infrastructure software sector, it's Postman, Sonar Source, Apache Kafka, Jenkins, and Istio putting up the best numbers. But some other vendors step into the spotlight here when it comes to improvement in utilization to churn since last survey. Sonar Source is up there as a top improver, but so is CloudBees, LucidWorks, and Webflow.
Before we wrap up for the day, we do want to take a quick chance to spotlight our new ETS data reports that we've been mentioning throughout the webinar. With this new style of report, ETR is vastly expanding its research coverage for vendors within the Emerging Technology Survey. As of today, 325 new reports are available in the ETR Reports Marketplace, including reports on repeat standout vendors from today's webinar like OpenAI, 1Password, Grafana, Hugging Face, Postman, Sneak, and many, many more. Be sure to check out the new reports, and as always, don't hesitate to reach out to our service or research teams with any thoughts, comments, or questions. We are always happy to improve our offerings based on client feedback.
And this concludes our Emerging Technology Survey Findings webinar. ETR has 3 flagship surveys we conduct multiple times a year: the Technology Spending Intentions Survey, the Emerging Technology Survey, and the Macro Views Survey, all powered by our thoroughly vetted and constantly growing ETR community of IT decision makers. We have interactive data visualizations, reports, and webinar replays from these surveys on our site. ETR also has a growing body of qualitative research from our ETR Insights interview series. These one-on-one and panel interviews with IT decision makers help tell the stories behind the data, and a searchable transcript library and associated analyst-written summaries are accessible through the reports marketplace. We also do custom surveys and focus group panels and interviews for organizations seeking best-in-class bespoke research on enterprise IT topics. And lastly, don't forget ETR has its own expert network service called ETR Connect, where you can conduct one-on-one calls with members from our IT decision maker community. Be on the lookout for sector and vendor-specific reports and the full recording from this webinar. Those are available on the ETR platform now. Until next time, take care.